Wisconsin voters will be asked again by the state legislature to consider adding another amendment to the Wisconsin state constitution. This proposal, which will be on the ballot in April, calls for adding to the state constitution an already existing state law that requires voters to show a photo ID. This latest proposal is just one in a slew of constitutional amendments offered up by the state legislature in recent years. Here to help us understand why this is happening is Debra Cronmiller, the executive director of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. Debra, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Denise, for having me.
We were going to talk a little bit about the way the Constitution is being amended by these efforts. But first, we want to kind of talk about the issue that's going to be on the ballot in April. There's already a state law requiring a photo ID to vote. So why does this need to be added to the state constitution?
Well, the League doesn't believe it does need to be, and the League also doesn't believe it should be in statute. We fought early on to try to prevent this law from being enacted. And the reason we fought it, years ago, a decade and a half ago, was to ensure that all eligible voters could easily access the ballot, exercise their right to vote. And what we prophesized at the time when it was being considered as a law is that, one, there would be a real financial cost to the state of Wisconsin, which has borne out, and two, that voters who are eligible who do not possess an ID as stipulated in the law will be disenfranchised. And what we have learned in the years since its enactment is that is exactly what has happened. There are people who are, non-drivers. 30% of Wisconsin's adult population does not possess a driver's license. So they have to go through the hoops, of trying to get another state ID. And our legislators minimize the amount of time and effort that takes, assume that everybody can access a DMV. But what we thought then and what we think now and know now is that there are voters in places in Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin, where the DMV is open hours a week. If they happen to work during that time, if they don't have access to transportation, and there are no public transportation options in 14 counties in Wisconsin, these are folks who might not be able to avail themselves of the necessary state voting ID. We also know that there are voters with disabilities who also don't have a driver's license, but may not be able to access a DMV. We've been working with the Wisconsin Disability Coalition and know that there are DMVs throughout the state of Wisconsin that are not accessible. Their websites are not reader accessible to low vision and blind individuals. Their buildings are not accessible to persons with mobility problems. And the DMV, though they're aware of this, for lack of financial resources from the state of Wisconsin and the legislature, are not able to correct these problems. This is disenfranchising eligible voters, and for that reason, the League has really always been against a voter ID requirement.
The ballot, the issue that's going to be on the ballot in April is probably at least the fourth election where we've had a legislative issue that has come to voters as an amendment to the state constitution. Why is this happening?
Probably a number of reasons, but what the League believes most is that this is a way to take a question that the legislature can't pass into law because there is a gubernatorial veto in the state of Wisconsin, and to avoid that veto, they are taking it straight to the people. And they say, that that's real democracy in work. Well, I would say real democracy in work is fulfilling the responsibilities of their constitutional requirements. The legislative branch of government is supposed to be making law. They are not supposed to be enacting policy through constitutional amendment. And for that reason, we really think that all of these constitutional amendments are just an affront to what is the legislative power, which is to make laws in the state of Wisconsin.
What does that do to the way our legislature is supposed to function, right? You pass a law, it goes to the governor either signs it or he doesn't sign it, he vetoes it. You can still come back to the legislature for the legislature to pass. So by doing this process, is it really shortcutting our legislative process?
I think it's creating an obstacle in the future for Wisconsin to change its mind. And what we know in Wisconsin is that we have amended our Constitution over all these hundreds of years, over 200 times. Almost half of those amendments to the Constitution have been to undo previously enacted constitutional amendments. So something that sounds good in the moment or in the political atmosphere that might exist at the time, in hindsight, voters realize this really isn't good for us. And then subsequent legislatures have to go through the same rigmarole. They have to go through 2 consecutive sessions. The joint resolutions have to have exactly the same language. It's difficult to undo a constitutional amendment, difficult to actually enact a constitutional amendment. But the reality is it's not the lawmaking that our legislatures actually charged with doing as the representatives of their districts.
One of the things that people have had some questions about with some of these past constitutional amendments is the actual language that's been placed on the ballot. We don't know what the language is going to look like in April, but in previous amendments, people felt that the language was confusing and it was difficult to understand what they were actually voting for. How do we avoid that?
I think it's safe to say the language is beyond confusing. The language is purposely, affirmatively leaning. And because the legislature can work with the Legislative Reference Bureau, who helps to author these constitutional questions that will hit our ballots, the wording, the context of the question can sound very appropriate, sound very positive, sound like it's good for Wisconsin, when in fact it might be masking what is a truly underlying problem with the question in the first place. What we know in our history is that constitutional amendment questions, because of the wording, is what the League believes, have over a 75% affirmative approval rating. So the propensity is for voters to vote yes. I mean, that's just the history. And that's borne out in the last number of election cycles, that for the most part, our voters have voted yes. And there will be real consequences to that. Last April, we voted yes on the constitutional amendment to limit the ability of municipalities to accept outside funding to support their election administration. And, on the surface, I think that there were those who thought, well, of course not. We just want government funds in our election administration funding. But this will tie the hands of our municipalities that will then have to go to its taxpayers to reap the dollars necessary to administer their elections. And there will be no other places for those resources to come from. And I'm confident that when people were voting yes to that constitutional amendment, they were not thinking, oh, my taxes might go up as a result.
There has been some discussion of a citizen-initiated referendum. That's something that Wisconsin does not allow. Is that something that would be a good thing to happen? Should citizens have the same right, perhaps, as state legislators, to suggest and put the question of amendments to the state constitution before voters?
We absolutely support this idea as the League of Women Voters. In many states, there is the opportunity to do a ballot initiative. This is the way that many states actually enact law and create policy in their states. And it's a way to get policy enacted, even if the sitting legislature is opposed to it for whatever political reason. So we think this would be a big plus here in Wisconsin. We really applaud the governor for initiating the petition. We also would like to see as an organization that the municipalities' right to stand up advisory referendums on local ballots would be allowed. We know that this legislature in the last shared revenue bill disallowed municipalities from allowing those municipalities from asking these questions. How do you govern if you don't know what the people in the area or your constituents are interested in? By prohibiting the asking of the question, I think the legislators tied their own hands, and we'd like to see that right reinstated.
Deborah, thank you so much for walking us through this rather complex issue. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have reached out to State Assembly Speaker Robin Vos and extended an invitation for him to join us to talk about this issue. We'll let you know if he does. That's it for this week's Connect MKE. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We appreciate it. Until next week, stay warm, take care, and be well.